Hello and welcome back everybody to the Food Build Factory, where today we're going to take a look at Dark Desperado. That's the guy you can see on screen right now, and as always I'm going to show you some gameplay in the first half of the video, and in the second half of the video we're going to take a look at the perks, mutations, equipment and everything else. So right off the get-go, what this character is going to be about is, as you can already see, we are playing as a gunslinger in power armor, which in and of itself is the first big red flag for pretty much every min-maxer out there. So a power armor gunslinger is just one of these kind of builds that, if at all you're going to see it, you're instantly going to think the person playing with it is just a very casual player or a noob. And there's mainly two good reasons why you pretty much never see gunslingers in power armor. The first big reason is that in general, when it comes to gunslingers, you pretty much do rely on VATS. It's with very few exceptions the way to go when it comes to handguns in this game, just because they have pretty bad damage output. That's just a main fact about gunslingers, and they're just not comparable to riflemen. Pretty much everything a rifleman can do, a gunslinger can do, but worse. So overall, yeah, that's the main reason you don't really see this kind of gameplay, just because, yeah, as you probably know, when it comes to power armor and VATS, it's a combination that in theory should work relatively well. You do have some modifications to your power armor that specifically boost your capabilities when it comes to VATS, but overall it's not the best decision, just because you're burning through fusion cores very fast. And that's just something I personally am not too bothered by anymore, just because while it is a bit of a hassle, it's not too crazy. I never found fusion cores to be too hard to come by. Now, if you're, I mean, obviously I'm playing a lot of different characters, so burning through a lot of fusion cores every now and then for a few hours isn't as big of a problem as you would main a character for eternity, basically. But on the other side, it still shouldn't be too much of a problem, and if you're dedicated to it, you can easily farm fusion cores. There's various ways, so that's the first big reason here. And another big reason is that when it comes to gunslingers, okay, we weren't quite able to outdamage this guy's healing here, but still wasn't too big of a problem. And the other big thing is that due to the aforementioned lack of power when it comes to pistols and the like, you usually see people trying to go for the stealth route just to get a little bit of extra damage from sneak attacks and so on. So most likely, if you see a gunslinger, it's something along the lines of a stealth character with a Gauss pistol or a 10mm or something like that. But yeah, that's basically just the first part I wanted to address here. It's not the first power armor gunslinger I have done. In fact, one of my favorites so far was a gunslinger using a Gauss pistol in power armor and actually not use VATS, which was kind of a crazy premise, but did work out pretty well. I had a lot of fun with it, and this time around, the main reason I wanted to do this here is for a reason which, yeah, you can see in my hand here, which is a Enclave plasma pistol with no modifications whatsoever. The only thing I've done is I've gave it a prime receiver just to maximize the damage output and also make it a little bit more convenient, at least in my eyes, to craft ammo. And the reason I wanted to do this is basically the Enclave plasma weapon is one of the more covered weapons when it comes to this game. People tend to like it a lot. However, whenever you see it, there's a good chance that you either see it with a flamer barrel attachment, which gives it a crazy damage output, to be honest. And if not, well, the only other thing you may see is seeing it with an automatic barrel or maybe a sniper barrel. But yeah, I've never really seen a video where someone tested the plasma pistol, or more specifically the Enclave plasma pistol, in its most basic form here. And yeah, I myself haven't tried this kind of configuration ever, basically, until I did this video. And to my surprise, I was actually having a lot of fun. It is definitely one of the better pistols I have played with. And the reason for that is quite simple. The first thing you will notice is basically that you have quite a large magazine capacity. 30 shots is pretty high compared to if you gave it a sniper barrel, only 9 shots. That's not a lot, so you basically have to invest into faster reload or something like that, and that already is a little bit of an investment we don't have to do here. Another big thing is, and this is something I have tried to look up on the various wikis and try to find like um, something like Reddit post or something. I just tried to find information about it, but it didn't really lead me anywhere, which is the VATS action point consumption. So one big downside to plasma weapons in general and the Enclave plasma rifle, in my opinion, has always been that I really wanted to use it with VATS, but it is quite a lot of consumption when it comes to action points in VATS. So you're basically having to invest a ton of points or equipment into giving you better action point refresh, so you can use bursts of fire and then refresh your action points pretty fast. And even then, with something like less VATS cost as a legendary effect and so on, it's kind of hard to get a good action point rate like on your weapon. That's basically a big problem in my eyes. And just from my point of view, like what I found out is if you're just using a very bare bones plasma pistol, it actually does consume comparatively little action points per shot compared to a sniper barrel configuration or something like that, which doesn't sound like the craziest thing in the world, but it actually makes a big difference on the battlefield in my eyes, and I had a ton of fun using it that way. You're missing out on a bit of damage, even quite a bit, but still I was surprised at how well the damage output still was on this thing. Now on this occasion we can't really use VATS, which obviously makes it way less viable of a weapon. We do really rely on VATS for the most part, so that's a bit of a downside, and here we're just going for the thruster. But yeah, I ultimately was very pleasantly surprised by the overall performance of the weapon. So that's why I went with it, and that's how I came to decide that I wanted to do a power armor gunslinger. Because one big elephant in the room, which I've addressed earlier, is when it comes to gunslingers, whenever possible, you want to go with stealth basically to give you just a little bit more of an edge when it comes to damage. That's not really an option with the plasma pistol in the first place, for the simple reason that it isn't silent. So even on a very, very stealthy character, you can get away. If you have at least a little bit of range, you can get away with using it with stealth, and sometimes I find myself using pistols like revolvers or so, and do often open up fights with sneak attacks just to get a bit of a better initial attack on enemies. But overall, it's not a sustainable way to play a gunslinger with a weapon like this, because you're going to be detected every now and then. So yeah, stealth wasn't really an option to begin with, and at that point power armor already became quite an interesting option. And that's why I decided to go with this kind of build here. And I didn't really think that it was a bad decision afterwards. Like, I find even the fusion core consumption is actually pretty okay. I've been playing for like 2 or 3 hours with this build that I'm currently having, and yeah, I went through 4 fusion cores or something, which definitely is more than you would expect on like general gameplay with a power armor build that doesn't use VATS, but it's also not too crazy in my eyes. Now another thing I did here was just give myself a little bit of a boost when it comes to efficiency of chems. So we do have chem fiend and chem resistant, just so we do get a little bit more bang for our buck when it comes to chems. And the go-to chem I'm using here is Psychotats. Now it does give a little bit of extra damage resistance, which is not the craziest thing in the world for us, just because we are already very tanky, which by the way is the main selling point for this build. You're pretty much always at full health, you're more or less indestructible, but more interestingly, it gives us extra damage and a little bit more perception, so we do have a little bit better hit chance here. Now talking about hit chance, that was one of my bigger concerns when it comes to the weapon in particular, just because having no sights and having such a short barrel and everything, I was really worried that hitting enemies was going to be a big problem. But I actually found out that it wasn't too much of a trouble at all. Like, sure, we're missing a shot every now and then, but not to a point where I find it frustrating or anything. So after all, we can zero in on our target pretty effectively due to concentrated fire. And yeah, oftentimes we do lose one or two shots when we're starting to fight at range, but that's ultimately not too big of a problem. And when it comes to the weapon itself, the probably most interesting thing here is what kind of legendary effects I went with, and yet again it was pretty off. Like, it's nothing crazy. I do have a medics, faster fire rate, faster reload version of the weapon. I am on a custom server, so I just try to reroll it every now and then. And this was like the third try or so, and I found it interesting because, yeah, at the beginning of the build I was actually going for a rifleman build and just had this thing as a backup because I wanted to look into it. And I carried it with me and was surprised by how effective it already was. I was actually expecting that I would really have to invest into something like an anti-armor, VATS crit, less VATS cost version or something, which would undeniably be better. But I actually had a ton of fun with this one here. Now, faster fire rate is not exactly necessary, but it just felt very enjoyable to use. Yet again, faster reload, pretty much the same story here. Since we have quite a good magazine capacity to begin with, it wasn't actually necessary and doesn't add too much to the character, but it just made the overall feel of playing the build actually quite a lot more enjoyable in my eyes. And lastly, the elephant in the room here is the medics effect, which is not too crazy either. It's actually a pretty bad effect for the most part. But since I actually was surprised at how effective the weapon turned out to be, I didn't really feel the need to go for something that gives me extra damage, surprisingly, and felt that the medics effect was working together very well with the kind of build feeling I was going here, being like indestructible and lay back. So this build here is really nice for when you just want to roam the wasteland. You're powerful enough to deal with pretty much everything. The only real problem that could be is if you're fighting something like Sheep Squatch or so, that it is time consuming. But even then, it's not a tough fight or anything. So this is a very good build for a casual player in my eyes. And I had a ton of fun with it. I never really had to worry about my health. If I actually do for some reason, so maybe you saw that when I was fighting Mr. Gutsies, that could in certain situations be a little bit more dangerous. If that's the case, you can easily just use a stim pack. We are already spec'd into that. In addition to all of that, we do have relatively good intelligence, so yeah, this is a very unique build in my eyes that I actually had surprisingly a surprising amount of fun with. And overall, I think the gameplay speaks for itself here. We're not like uber crazy or something, but in terms of damage output, but there's just nothing that really stands to be a problem for us. So these here super mutants were actually not a problem whatsoever. The gun is surprisingly ammo efficient still, even though we need like 2 or 3 shots to take down enemies on a lot of occasions. But yeah, as I said, it's nothing too crazy. Like I actually burned through 1,000 ultrasight plasma cartridges or so, which is not a big deal. If you ever crafted ultrasight plasma cartridges, they're actually pretty easy to obtain. The weapon is very efficient to farm ammo with in daily ops. So if you don't want to be bothered to craft your ammo, you can just use one of the easier daily ops and do that for half an hour and end up with like 2,000 to 3,000 shots again. So yeah, overall a very solid all-around build, which I was actually very surprised by. And if you look down to our fusion cores, basically through the whole video we have burned through like 1.5 fusion cores probably. So yeah, it's also not too demanding on that front in my eyes. Now, just so we don't get surprised while looking at the rest of the build here are usually some ticks that I wanna address. Usually they're not a problem, but just because the vertebrate bots are around, maybe they could have been aggroed and yeah, bite me in the back, which is not a good thing in my eyes. So yeah, that was it in terms of gameplay. I hope you enjoyed it. I am tempted to try this again with the same build, but just go for an even more powerful version of the weapon, as I talked, anti-armor, VATS crit, less VATS cost or something. But I probably won't make a video about it. Maybe I address it in one of my upcoming videos. But yeah, overall I had a lot of fun with it, and now we're going to take a look at the rest of the build, starting off with the mutations. So here you can see my mutations aren't too out of the ordinary when it comes to a VATS build. Like, we do have adrenal reaction, which is always hit or miss. You don't need it. On this occasion, it's actually quite a waste of time because we are pretty much always at full health, maybe down to 90 at some point, but yeah, we're not really getting anything out of adrenal reaction. However, the only downside is that we have less HP to begin with, so if I were to build this character from the get-go, I wouldn't have bothered with using adrenal reaction, just because, as I said, it's only a downside and we don't really get anything out of it. However, since we are using a medic's weapon and are therefore pretty much always at full health, it didn't really matter either that we had less HP, so keep that in mind. The ones we actually want to have on this occasion are Bird Bones and Eagle Eyes though. Pretty straightforward for a VATS character. Extra agility and perception is nice for more action points to use, more VATS hit chance, and lastly more crit damage. Also very nice, just because we're trying to get as much crits as possible. The downsides are that we have less strength, but overall that's just influencing our amount of carry weight, which isn't great with this build. However, you just have the option to use calibrated shocks rather than the cooling vents I used on this occasion. So yeah, in exchange for a little bit more fusion core consumption, you could even have pretty good carry weight in my eyes. Then we do have Egghead, which just synergizes well with what I was going for here. We do have 15 intelligence, and therefore, yeah, putting another 6 intelligence onto that is nice to have. Now we have a considerable downside debuff to our intelligence from Marsupial, but overall we are still ending up with quite a solid 17 intelligence, which is pretty okay. It's nothing like if you're min-maxing for power leveling or something, but still for a casual gameplay, 17 intelligence is pretty good to level up. And then, yeah, as I already mentioned, we do have Marsupial and Speed Demon. Now those are pretty much on every single build of mine. Just more jump height and movement speed is just universally good in my eyes. Obviously, as I said, the debuff to intelligence is a bit of a waste of potential maybe, but yeah, that's basically it. And lastly, faster reload speed from Speed Demon synergizes very well with the faster reload speed we do have on our weapon. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Now you can also see we do have a targeting matrix active, which is just yeah, a modification to our power armor helmet, but I'm going over that in a minute. And yeah, that was it when it comes to our mutations. Then we go over to our equipment, and here we have it: a medic's faster fire rate, faster reload, Enclave plasma pistol, and as I already told you, no modifications. Like, this is just the basic standard it comes at. Short barrel, standard grip, standard sights, and the only thing I did was adding a prime capacitor. So you can see we end up with 59 ballistic and 64 energy damage. Then the only difference I would make maybe on this character is I would try to go for a weapon that has a reflex sight, because that's just a bit of an improvement here. But other than that, I'm actually pretty okay with this weapon, surprisingly. I mean, it looks like an absolute trash can because it's just so bare bones, but yeah, as I said, I do think it has its place in the game, actually. As stupid as it sounds, I would prefer this over a plasma pistol with a sniper barrel at that point. And yeah, I've already talked a lot about the effects during the video, so not a lot to mention here. The range is pretty okay for such a short pistol, to be honest. 120 is not too bad, and with our accuracy, it's not that big of a deal. Like, we do have actually quite high accuracy. If you see there, 144, that's actually pretty good. So at close ranges, we actually have quite a good build here. Quite a good weapon here. It's also very lightweight, which is nice, keeping in mind we do not have a lot of carry weight. And yeah, not sure what else to say about it. I could maybe address the condition on this weapon, which isn't too great, I would say. I mean, we do run rank 5 of Gunsmith, and still we burn through, I would say, like 60% of our condition during the duration of the video. But while it isn't great, it's also by no means bad. So it's pretty much fitting to the weapon. It's a very solid all-rounder in my eyes, like very solid through and through. And yeah, that being said, we now go over to our armor. As you probably noticed, we are in power armor. The one I was using was the Hellcat power armor, which yeah, gives us a little bit of extra ballistic resistance or damage reduction, more to say. And the whole set is a 2-star set, and the only thing I was actually looking out for was I wanted to have action point refresh on every single piece, which is probably a little overkill, but since we are very troubled in our agility section, we didn't really have room for Action Boy, so I just went and pretty much dealt with action point refresh completely with my armor, because on top of all of the AP refresh pieces, we do have a core assembly, which also makes it so we do refresh action points faster, and on top of that we also have Lone Wanderer. So at a certain point, which is actually pretty early on, like with 3 pieces of AP refresh, it would have been enough at that point, especially with the core assembly modification. Probably the core assembly modification and 1 piece of powered gear is actually enough so that you really don't have to worry about your action point refresh. But I really wanted to just go all in on it, and if I just bring down my action points at this point, you can see how fast we are refreshing it. Let me just trigger the VATS button to get rid of it, and now you can see it. It actually refreshes extremely fast, so we never really have to worry about that, because even though it's way more action point efficient than a sniper version of this weapon, for example, it still isn't like super effective compared to maybe a railway rifle or something like that. So you do still burn through action points relatively fast. And yeah, other than that, I do have the, that's again the, I do have the VATS metrics overlay on my helmet, just to give us yet again a little bit more VATS accuracy. On the arms, I obviously have no modifications because there was nothing we needed. And lastly, the legs do have cooling vents, just to further reduce the amount of drainage that goes into our fusion cores. So we can, yeah, further reduce the drainage on them a little bit. It's not a lot, it's like 5% per leg, I think, or 10, no, I think it's 5%. So it's nothing crazy, but still, it does help. So if you have trouble with carry weight, as I said, you could just use calibrated shocks here to give you 100 extra carry weight, which is probably the more sensible option, but I didn't really think that it was necessary on this occasion. And lastly, other than the powered legendary effect, I went with a bit of a mixed set of Slayers pieces. So as you can see, we do have 2 Ghoul Slayers pieces, 1 Exterminators, 1 Assassins, and 1 Zealots piece, just to reduce the incoming damage from certain enemies by a little bit. These are through the bank, I think, among the worst Slayers effect you could have. Usually I just want to have Mutant Slayers and Troubleshooters, because these are the more powerful enemies I run into at the daily basis. And yeah, Ghouls and Scorched and humans typically aren't too much of a threat, but yeah, I just wanted to have the power pieces, and the rest is mixed matched here. It doesn't really matter. And yeah, that being said, we can now go over to our perks. And as you can see here, we do have 3 strength, which I have used for traveling pharmacy. And I mean, whenever I'm in power armor, I pretty much have to deal with traveling pharmacy, because on every single character I do play with, chems and especially stimpaks and all that stuff seem to be that one thing that stacks up pretty quickly in my inventory. So I can't really live without it. I couldn't walk a mile. I mean, I'm probably at 1,000 or so carry capacity if I'm not using traveling pharmacy. That being said, on this particular occasion, it's actually rather fitting thematically too, just because, yeah, as I said, and as you will see in pretty much a minute, we are spec'd into using chems relatively efficiently, which just helps in tougher situations. For example, I should have and could have used Psychotats when I was fighting the Scorch Beast earlier, so keep that in mind. And also you can use Overdrive in addition to that, just to give you a little bit more critical damage, but yeah, overall, that's pretty much it. Then we do go over to Perception, and this is one of those approaches when it comes to a gunslinger where I go for bare minimum. Oftentimes when I go with gunslingers, I try to go at least to Perception 9 or 12, just to give me um, a little bit more hit chance, but you just start filling up Perception with very situational perks like Glow Sight or something like that. And on this occasion I just went with Tank Killer and Concentrated Fire, and it was really enough in my eyes. Tank Killer just giving us a staggered chance, which is nice, but the more or better selling point here is Armor Penetration, which is always nice to have. And since we're talking about Armor Penetration, I should mention that this build is only going to become more powerful in the near future, so I'm pretty sure every single one of you has heard about the incoming buff, so to speak. It's basically more of a fix to energy weapons where they will start to penetrate armor better than they currently do. So the easy version here is, yeah, currently all the armor penetration that comes from energy weapons or elemental weapons currently just comes from their base weapon damage and not from the incoming damage. So overall they are just going to have a little bit better damage output, and I'm looking forward for that. But at least for the moment, Tank Killer will do the job, and as you saw there, we weren't really struggling with damage output. Then we do have Concentrated Fire. On a semi-automatic weapon like this here, rank 3 of Concentrated Fire is still a very good pick, rather than rank 1. I mean, you can definitely get away with just using rank 1 of it, but it's very beneficial to have rank 3 here just because the increase in hit chance after every single shot is pretty immense. I think it's something like 25% or so. So that being said, we're now going over to Endurance, which is fairly mediocre at Endurance 8, and what I wanted to have here is Fireproof. We don't have access to a dense chest piece on a power armor, so Fireproof is pretty much one of the must-haves in my eyes. I mean, you can definitely get away without it because it's definitely rather situational, unless you're using an explosive weapon. But in these rare situations where a legendary robot explodes near you, or a car explodes, or you're attacked by a super mutant suicider, it's nice to have Fireproof just because it keeps you from being frustrated or one hit at certain situations. We probably would get away without it, but I still have it here because I always do. And then we did have 5 points left, which went into chem resistant, meaning we can't get addicted to any chems we take. And lastly, Chem Fiend, just to make it more efficient to use them, bringing us to, like, when we're talking about Psychotats, they last for 8 minutes with Chem Fiend, which is nice. Like, that's a considerable amount of time. I mean, a very good comparison is that's basically a whole daily operation if you manage to do it in 8 minutes, but usually it's very possible. And speaking about it, this build is actually pretty good for a lot of daily operations. So yeah, nothing too out of the ordinary here, but yeah. Then we do go over to Charisma, and I went with Lone Wanderer for basically no particular reason here. We neither need the tankiness nor the AP refresh desperately, but that being said, yeah, I wanted to just use it for some reason. Probably the more sensible pick would have been Tenderizer here, and the single reason I didn't use it is basically that I didn't feel like I have to, and I was actually really surprised by how efficient the weapon worked. So I actually wanted to live without Tenderizer for once, just because I could, and yeah, that's it. But other than that, Tenderizer is probably the better pick here. And even more than that, since we are using a medic's weapon, that's something I haven't really mentioned so far. It sounds a bit counterintuitive to use a medic's weapon on a solo build, just because, yeah, the big selling point of a medic's weapon should be that you can heal your teammates, your nearby teammates, by doing crits. The thing is, though, I always liked the medic's effect for solo use, even though vampires would just be straight up better on a lot of occasions. But it isn't actually working all that well when it comes to healing teammates. First and foremost, they have to be very close to you in order to get the effect to work, and even then it sometimes just doesn't work. So this is intended as a solo character, but what you could do is you could just swap out Lone Wanderer for Tenderizer and Strange Numbers or something like that, and it would be a very viable team character too. That's all I'm saying here. And then we go over to Intelligence, which is maxed out, as I already mentioned. So we do a First Aid, which is kind of a deadweight perk here, just because we very rarely get into the situation where we do have to use a stim pack in the first place. And being in power armor, we could also just spam multiples of them. But I wanted to just max out my Intelligence and didn't really know what else to use here. I was tempted to use Nerd Rage, but that seemed even less useful than First Aid. What you could actually do, I just didn't have the perk points here, is for once, since you just want to fill up 3 perk points, you could just use the hacker perks for once, which is something I pretty much never did, I think, in any of my builds. Just because, yeah, whenever I want to do a character that is good at hacking or so, I give it a legendary perk, the Infiltrator perk. But that's something you could actually do on this occasion and fill it with the hacker perks, which would be probably the more useful thing to do here rather than First Aid. But that being said, we're starting to look at perks that are actually really useful here, and this is Power User. Probably one of the most important perks here, because while I said that nowadays I don't really bother to avoid vets in power armor just because I think fusion cores are pretty easy to obtain. You don't want to use this build without power user, because at that point you really burn through fusion cores very fast. I think with power user it's a very considerable amount, but without power user it's actually very fast. You can really, within the span of like 30 seconds, you can burn through a whole fusion core. So yeah, power user was a bit of a must-have on this occasion. So was batteries included. Plasma cartridges are actually relatively heavy, and on top of that you want to carry a good amount of fusion cores, so reducing the weight of energy ammo was just yet again a must-have on my eyes. And then we do have Gunsmith. Already mentioned it a bit earlier. The condition on this weapon isn't too crazy, and without Gunsmith I think it would actually be bothersome. You would have to spend a lot of time repairing the weapon. As always with Gunsmith, obviously if you are a high level player and you have access to a ton of repair kits, this just becomes a non-issue, but I personally still prefer to use Gunsmith on this occasion. And lastly, we do have Chemist. We had one more perk point left to spend, and Chemist felt rather fitting just because we actually have all the means to use chems efficiently. I personally find to craft chems very rarely in this game, just because I just keep stumbling across them, and really just the stuff like Psycho Buff, Psycho Tats, Buff Tats and all that stuff I have a really good supply of for some reason. I mean, I'm always picking them up and never really selling them, but still I'm sitting on a stash of 130 or 150 Psycho Tats here, so I didn't really find it necessary. But that being said, 1 point of investment for Chemist is a nice thing to have. You could obviously just swap it in whenever you need it, but yeah, I felt like it was rather fitting on this occasion. And now we're going to take a look at probably the most interesting stat tree here, which is agility, and I have all the gunslinger perks maxed out here. In addition to that, I do have 1 ring of gun fu, and the last 5 points went into adrenaline. So very often when I do a gunslinger character, I just have to make a lot of compromises in agility, because I want to have stuff like White Knight, so I don't really have to worry about my armor all that much. You want to have Gun Fu a little bit at least. Then you want to have Action Boy, just because you're probably relying on VATs, and there's just a lot going on, so that oftentimes you don't really have the room to use adrenaline and really maximize your damage output here. But on this occasion I just went all in with it, and pretty much had no single convenient perk here. It's just all for damage basically. The only convenient perk you could argue is Gunfu, just because you can automatically swap from target to target, but it also gives you a little bit of a damage buff, so every single perk you see in this stat tree here gives us more damage basically, which worked out very well in my eyes. And that being said, we're now going over to Luck, which is filled with that perk, as you could imagine probably. We do have Grim Reaper Sprint, which is always a nice perk to have when it comes to Luck. And I mean, if you're playing vets, obviously. If you're not playing vets, then Grim Reaper Sprint would be useless. But giving us a 35% chance to refill our action points whenever we kill an enemy. On this occasion, we could definitely live without it, just because our AP refresh is so good. But it would still make the whole gameplay a lot less fluent, if that makes sense. So I actually tried it without Grim Reaper Sprint and going a bit further into using Vets Crit related perks, but I felt like the gameplay was more fluent and more fun with Grim Reaper Sprint active. Then we do have 1 point of Psychopath. This is just because I wanted to have luck maxed out, and I did need starch genes, as you can imagine probably. So yeah, on this occasion there was 1 perk point left, and that went into Psychopath, just to give us an ever so slight chance to refill our critical meter instantly whenever we kill an enemy. Not gonna lie, it's a very small chance, it doesn't happen all that often, and you can pretty much live without it and use anything else, but there just wasn't anything. Usually what I do with that 1 perk point is oftentimes I go with Class Freak or 1 rank of Bloody Mess or so, but yeah, on this occasion I just went with Psychopath, and yeah, that's it. Then we do have better criticals. This was a very obvious one. We're really relying on critical hits to do the most of our damage here, and therefore better criticals was a must-have. There's not a lot to say about that. Making our crits better is just good. Then we do have Four Leaf Clover, and this is a lot of perk investment for relatively little outcome on this occasion, just because we do have critical savvy, so our crits don't consume our whole critical meter. They consume only 55% of it, and that means with the amount of luck that we do have, within 2 shots we can refill our critical meter. So on the 3rd shot we do get a critical hit for sure. So the only real chance for Four Leaf Clover to give us an extra crit is on the first hit after a crit. So we're severely limiting the amount of times that Four Leaf Clover can actually be useful to us, but still, every now and then it does happen that we can get a crit after just 1 shot, and for just that little bit of time, Four Leaf Clover is actually nice to have here, and ultimately there wasn't anything I was desperately in need of. Otherwise, I just really wanted to go all in on the crit perks. Just keep in mind, Psychopath and Four Leaf Clover on this occasion give you relatively little. Like, you could definitely live without them if you find that you want to go for a bit more solid damage output, go with Bloody Mass, or if you don't want to live with the debuffs from your Mutations, you can go with Class Freak. There's a lot you can use that's more convenient or so, but I wanted to go all in on the crits on this occasion, so that's why these perks are here, but keep in mind they're not the most efficient. They could be, at least. And yeah, that all being said just leaves us with legendary perks. And as always, the boring ones right off the get-go are the legendary stat increases, legendary luck, endurance, intelligence, and agility. So with the exception of agility, legendary intelligence, luck, and endurance, they give us access to more perk points. So yeah, we are at 12 luck, for example, or at 6 endurance, and they just give us access to use more perks. The only exception, as I said, is agility, which is at 15 base, and we just improve our action points even further by boosting our agility up to 18 with 3 extra agility. I could have maxed this out because I'm on a custom world, so I could have just scrapped all of my access perks, but I didn't really feel like it was necessary on this occasion. And the more interesting ones here are very 2 convenient legendary perks, Electric Absorption and Ward Rats. Nothing out of the ordinary. These are probably my favorite legendary perks, to be honest. Electric Absorption is always there when I'm in power armor. It's just such a good perk. It heals you when enemies attack you with energy weapons. No, it doesn't always. It says it has a 13% chance. But this perk is an excellent example of a perk that's selling itself way worse than it actually is. So on paper, a 13% chance to recharge your fusion core when you're attacked by a energy weapon doesn't sound too crazy. Sure, it's convenient and helps you, especially on a build like that where you are burning through fusion cores pretty fast, but it's not too crazy. However, what the perk doesn't say is that it also heals you when that happens, and it's crazy. So you saw that when the Assaultron was fighting us, that's basically the main selling point. Stuff like Assaultrons are just a non-issue anymore. They can damage you actually. I mean, they do damage you, but they heal you for more than they damage you. So yeah, it's just such a good perk. It's always there, and even at rank one or two, it's just good enough. Obviously, maxed out is crazy, but yeah, that's more than enough. And lastly, what rats now, especially in a power armor character, you don't really need what rats, to be honest. But I just find it convenient, and especially since we're always topping up our health with the medic's effect, not having to worry about like 5 or 10% radiation over time that will dilute your HP pool. That's nice to have. So yeah, it's very convenient, but you can go for pretty much everything else you want here. What rats is definitely one of the most unnecessary perks here. It's just for my OCD personally, so that I don't always have to see like the tiniest bit of red in my health bar. And yeah, that's it. I really hope you enjoyed the build, guys. I certainly did. It was a ton of fun, and if you have never tried it, I would just suggest you give the short Enclave pistol a try. It's actually very fun. I'm sure you can do way more with it. If you use something like, as I said, better prefixes or so, you can actually make a pretty good weapon out of it. I would be pretty interested to see what a good, capable, bloodied build can do with a bloodied version of that pistol. Could actually be pretty crazy in my eyes, but that's up to you guys, and yeah, see you next time. Bye.